Up to this point, the web pages you've written have not been interactive aside from a few hover effects and links. But in this Sprints project, that will begin to change. Initially, these interactions will be simple, like the ability to click a button to open and close a form, but their complexity will grow in later sprints. This screencast will introduce you to the mechanisms that allow us to handle user interactions in JavaScript. For starters, let's get some terminology straight. The term event refers to something that happens inside the browser window. This includes, but is not limited to, all forms of user interaction, such as mouse clicks and key presses. When an event occurs on a web page, a signal will be produced, and we can write code in order to listen for these signals, and then react accordingly. We can listen for events by adding so-called event listeners to DOM nodes via the appropriately named addEventListener method. When our listener hears an event, it will call a function which is referred to as an event handler. Finally, the event handler will perform some action in response to the event. I'm sure that all sounds rather abstract, so let's take a look at an example. Here we have a very simple counter application. There is a text element with a number in it, and a button that says click to add 1. If we click on this button, the counter increments by 1. Now let's take a look at how this was implemented. First, we are selecting the necessary elements using document.querySelector. Next, we define a function called increment. This function describes what will happen when the increment button is clicked. In the body of this function, we first declare a variable called currentCount. This variable is an integer corresponding with the text content of count element. To convert the text content from a string to an integer, we are using the built-in parseInt method. This conversion is necessary to perform the addition because the plus operator performs concatenation on strings, even when the strings contain numbers. After this, we simply set the text content inside of count element to be equal to whatever the value of the current count is, plus 1. The last piece of the puzzle is the line adding the event listener to increment button. Let's note that the addEventListeners method takes 2 arguments. The first is a string that specifies the event which is being listened for. There are a number of options for this, but click is one of the more common. If you'd like to see the full list, Google MDN event reference. The second argument is the function that will be called when the event occurs. Before we leave, let's take a moment to review the steps that we took to set an event listener. Select the necessary DOM elements. Define a handler function, which will do something whenever a specified event occurs. Add an event listener to the desired element with the addEventListener method. And then pass the handler function as the second argument of the listener. Now you know how the basic event handling process works in JavaScript, so go out there and add some interactivity to your web pages.